Let me give you a little background about my life. I grew up with my parents separated. I would have to go back and forth between my mom and dad's house. My mom lived in a small town called Weston, Nebraska, in a 2-story house. My dad was super sick, so my twin brother and I went to go stay with my mother for a while, until he recovered. I didn't have a bedroom of my own. My brother Dean and I had to share a room upstairs with my half-brother Gary. My mom and stepfather stayed in the master bedroom down the hall. Rather than share a room with my brothers, I decided to sleep downstairs on the living room couch. I always hated that house. It always felt like someone was watching me. One night during the summer, we got home late. Everyone was getting ready for bed, and I settled down on the couch and waited for everyone to go into their rooms so I could finally get some rest. I eventually dozed off. I woke up in the middle of the night. It felt like I was pulled up from the couch. Panic took over. I tried to move, but my body was paralyzed, as if a heavy weight was on top of my chest. As I struggled in vain, a cold hand covered my mouth and nose, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I felt myself slipping away. Suddenly, the weight lifted, and I shot up off the couch and took deep, gasping breaths. After composing myself, I began to cry until I fell back asleep. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. For all I knew, it was just a violent nightmare. Fast forward a few months later, and we were having a very bad storm. I listened as the hail hit the AC unit outside the living room. It was about 3 a.m. I was beginning to drift off. From my position on the couch, I could see into the kitchen. There was a small sunroom with our washer and dryer next to the back door. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I could see something darting back and forth between the kitchen and the sunroom. It was a dark mass that almost resembled a human, but had a transparent body, like it was pacing between the sunroom and kitchen, looking for something. I laid there, as still as a statue, watching this thing go back and forth. I slowly pulled the covers up to the bridge of my nose, terrified to take my eyes away from the figure. 5 minutes go by, and it just vanishes into thin air. To get to the stairwell from downstairs, you had to go through the kitchen, and even with that thing being gone, I wasn't going to take my chances of trying to go up the stairs and wake up my mom. I ended up pulling the covers completely over my head and fell back asleep. The next morning, I questioned everyone in the house if they were awake the night before, walking around downstairs. Everyone, including my mom, just shrugged it off and assumed that I had just had a really bad nightmare. Not much happened after that. However, my mother ended up passing away. My father was still very sick at the time, so Dean and I had to stay with my grandmother for the time being. After my mother's funeral, we moved from Nebraska to Iowa to stay with my aunt. As if the story couldn't get any more tragic, my dad succumbed to his illness and passed away as well. Dean and I were orphans. My stepdad was still living in that same house, and we got to see him from time to time. Whenever we would come visit, the strange occurrences began happening again. Maybe it was just the grief, but that place seemed darker, and it felt like something was off, more than usual. We stayed the night with my stepfather during Christmas vacation. Before my mom passed, she bought a massage chair. It was very comfortable, and I slept in it the first night back. My brother and stepdad stayed awake playing on the family computer all night. After a while, Dean shook me awake. His eyes were huge, and his face was completely drained of color. I asked him, "What the hell is wrong with you?" "Natalie, listen. I was playing on the computer, and I looked over and I saw your hair floating." I felt my blood turn to ice as it ran down my veins. I got out of the chair and shared the couch with my brother that night, but I couldn't sleep. We ended up going back to my grandma's the following morning, not wanting to stay in that house anymore. Later on, when we went back to visit, my stepdad and uncle were cleaning up the front yard and found one of my old teddy bears buried under some leaves. They decided to wash it up and give it back to me, because the bear was a gift from my mother she bought for me years ago. I was happy to have it back, even if the button didn't work anymore. I would still press the button multiple times a day, hoping and praying that it would work again. My stepdad drove us back to my grandma's. When we got there, he opened the trunk to grab our bags. That's when the bear activated and began playing its little tune again. I couldn't believe it. The tune started off in its regular upbeat tone. However, as it went on, it became a distorted, droning cacophony. It slowed down and then eventually stopped. It was creepy, but I brushed it off, thinking that it was just the old, damaged wiring. However, the bear would turn on and off for the rest of that night, playing that same droning tune. During the early hours of the morning, I was laying in bed when I heard a crackling voice coming from the teddy bear. Natalie. It spoke my name. I tossed it into the garbage the next day. My stepfather ended up being deported back to the UK, and we never returned to that house again after that. It would eventually be torn down years later, and I was happy to see it go. I really wish that was the end of the story, but sadly, it isn't. To this day, I still have horrible nightmares about that house. I sometimes dream about being back there, alone, in the dark. I make my way up the stairs and stand in the doorway to the bathroom and stare into the vanity mirror. Everything starts to feel heavy, and I begin to cry for my mother. An apparition that looks like my mother appears in the mirror, smiling at me. Its smile unnerves me, unnaturally extending from ear to ear. The eyes turn black, and then I hear its disturbing voice. You'll never get away from me. Never. That's when I wake up. I just wish I could forget about that wretched house, bury it in the past and move on with my life. But it will forever live on in my nightmares. I'll start off by saying that I don't live with my family. I'm currently renting a house a half a mile away from them. My mom and my brother live in a subdivision, and my dad is currently working abroad. My brother has a mental disorder, which can make him unpredictable sometimes, and he's still in high school, which also further complicates things. So last year, when my family moved into that house, my mother began experiencing unnatural things. Before she moved in, Mom decided to visit and clean up the house with two of her acquaintances. While they were cleaning, they found these weird red triangle stickers placed above each door. At first, they laughed it off. However, my mother suspected that something wasn't quite right here. When the stickers were removed, she had this inexplicable feeling that they were making a big mistake. The ceiling fans began to turn on and off by themselves. One of my mother's friends was an experienced painter, and he was left alone to paint the walls while my mom went for a food run. She knocked on the door when she got back, but no one answered. She then texted him to let him know that she was back. Suddenly, she received a reply. Just wait. My mom was taken aback by the rude and abrupt message, but she figured that he may have been in the bathroom or something. After a couple of minutes, she knocked on the door again, and her friend eventually opened the door. When it came time to leave, she casually asked her friend if he didn't hear her when she knocked earlier, and mentioned the text message that he had sent. Her friend insisted that he had never sent her a message, and that he couldn't hear her knocking because he had been blasting music on his phone. This gave Mom the creeps. The next occurrence happened right after the house was done being remodeled. My mom, along with a coworker of hers, arrived at the house, and they couldn't open the door. They both pushed on the door as hard as they could, when suddenly there came 3 knocks from the other side. After they forced the door open, they searched the entire house, but no one was there. We found out from some of the neighbors that the family who lived there before didn't stay there for very long because of a series of bizarre and inexplicable occurrences. After my mom and brother moved in, the supernatural events worsened. There have been numerous attempts to deal with the restless spirits in the house, even inviting some local pastors over to bless the home. I was and still am worried about my wayward brother. Whatever resides in that house has seemed to take a special interest in him. He can hear his name being called out, beckoning to him. This is still an ongoing occurrence. I'll list some of the other things that they have been experiencing. Household items are moved around. Faucets are turned on. Lights flicker uncontrollably. Random knocking can be heard on the roof, and scratch marks have appeared on the walls. My mother has reached her breaking point and plans on moving out of that hell house. I just hope it's not too late for them. Their departure may trigger whatever is targeting my brother. It might just stop toying with him and make its move. This happened back in 2006 or 2007. I was around 8 or 9 years old. I had never really experienced anything that could be considered paranormal in my house up to that point. But on one lonely night, that would all change. It was around midnight when I happened to wake up. As usual, my bedroom door was open, with the hallway light turned on. When I looked over, I saw something. There was a dark, faceless figure looming in the corner of my room. I didn't really know what to think or do. Oddly enough, I didn't feel scared at first. I was more curious than anything. The tall figure continued to linger and just stared at me. Looking back, I can honestly say that I wasn't experiencing some kind of sleep paralysis. This seemed far too real to be a dream. I decided to slowly turn around and face the wall, cover myself up with a blanket, and close my eyes. The next thing I knew, it was morning. I decided not to tell my parents about the dark figure. They were some pretty hardcore Christians, and I honestly didn't want to freak them out. I eventually did tell my mother about it. Luckily, she took it pretty well. Instead of flipping out on me, she told me that she had also witnessed something similar. Her encounter was much more disturbing than mine. According to her, a tall, dark figure also appeared to her in the middle of the night. My father remained asleep. Suddenly, the towering figure moved in and began to choke her. She began to pray. The dark figure eventually loosened its grip and backed away. And soon, it disappeared. It was only after it was gone that my father woke up. Personally, I think the entity also attacked me as well, but in a different way, because ever since its appearance, terrible things have happened to me over the years. I am now 23 years old, and I still live in that same house. Thankfully, I have never experienced anything like that ever since, and I can only speculate as to what the tall, dark figure was and what its intentions were.
always a reason to be afraid.